Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents 10 Rules for Marrying a Duke by Mclean, narrated by Clare Staniforth. Chapter 1. A respectable lady would never blackmail her way into matrimony. The Honourable Miss Arabella Bromley glanced at Charlotte, the Right Honourable Lady Waterstack, if one wanted to be fussy about it, and rolled her eyes. "Yes, my dear Charlotte, you are quite correct. However, what I am about to do is less blackmail and more bargaining from my point of view. Besides, the question of my respectability is what created the necessity for this small deception in the first place." Charlotte folded her arms and sat back against the carriage cushions. "You had, until recently, I'll grant you, excellent marriage prospects, if you'd had any desire to take advantage of them." "Which I did not," Arabella said, pushing her spectacles up her nose so she could keep her eyes glued to the window and the doorway beyond it, through which her salvation would hopefully be exiting any moment now. "And now it's too late. My family's reputation is in tatters, and I'll never get a husband who can help me fix this whole mess short of some sort of trickery. Well, trickery is the wrong word. What would be the right word, then?" Charlotte smiled sweetly at her, but Arabella didn't buy it for a second. Charlotte, at her sweetest, was very dangerous indeed. Arabella didn't answer her, but went back to watching the door. She wasn't any happier about her present course of action than Charlotte, decidedly less so. But her choices were limited and her problems plentiful, and she would do what must be done. The moment her eldest sister, Alice, had eloped with their groom, Arabella's desires ceased to matter. What mattered now was getting their younger sister, Anna, suitably wed. A prospect that seemed nearly impossible now that their family name was irreparably tarnished. No one wanted to marry the sister of a woman with so little regard for herself, her family, and her position in life that she would hastily marry someone so far beneath her. They looked at the pretty and vivacious Anne and assumed that she must be just as flighty and morally bankrupt as her sister, if not more so. She'd never find a suitable match, at least not one that would make her happy and give her the comfort and status in life she deserved. As for Arabella, well, no one had ever looked at or thought of her much, which was how she preferred it. She would be quite content as a dried-up old spinster alone in a quiet room with her books. But this wasn't about what she wanted any more. Anne had been inconsolable since Alice had eloped and the invitations began to dry up. What they needed was a champion, a high-ranking champion no one would dare cross, who could ease them back into society's good graces and facilitate a suitable and perhaps even advantageous match for Anne. And Arabella knew just the man. Silas Spencer, Duke of Whittsley. A distant cousin to the Queen, he was of a rank and status far above Arabella's own, despite her baronet father and relatively wealthy family. He was a bit rakish and too unserious for Arabella's tastes, but his background was impeccable and his opinions carried great weight. If he accepted the Bromleys, society would follow, and no one would dare besmirch or shun his wife or in-laws. "Harry," Charlotte said, leaning forward to get her attention, "if you insist on this absurdity, surely there are more suitable gentlemen to ask." Arabella shook her head. "A more suitable gentleman wouldn't deign to listen to me, let alone go along with it." "And you think he will?" Arabella hesitated before answering. "I think I have a better chance of convincing him than I do anyone else. He's a bit eccentric, a prankster. A scheme like this might pique his interest, at least long enough to hear me out." Charlotte sat back with a huff. "That may be so, but I still do not see why you think he will actually agree to your plans." "Because while there is certainly no shortage of women who would happily marry him, women who are, I'll admit, more suited to life as his Duchess, He has made no secret of the fact that he has absolutely no interest in marriage. The last thing he wants is a wife as a permanent fixture on his arm." "And this makes him perfect in your plot to get married. How exactly?" Arabella smiled. "He still needs an heir. He is the last male descendant in his line. Unless he produces a son, his title will revert to the crown. Even he can't shirk his familial duty forever. To get a legitimate heir, he'll have to wed. And unlike the throngs of women vying to be his wife, you want as little to do with him as he presumably wants to do with you." "Exactly." Charlotte closed her eyes and rubbed her brow. "Your logic is making my head fit for cracking." Arabella shoved her spectacles back up on her nose and smiled. She did tend to have that effect on poor Charlotte. It's simple, Charlotte. Most women marrying someone of his stature will want to take advantage of their new position. They'll want to be seen, paraded around the country, soaking up the prestige and attention that comes with being the Duchess of Whittsley. And rightly so. But for a man who does not wish for a wife, this is surely a daunting prospect. I, however, would not only happily accept exile in the country, but I shall insist upon it. Once he helps my sister, of course. And once you conceive an heir." Arabella grimaced. "Right." She took a deep breath, trying to calm the riot in her stomach at the thought of what she must do to uphold her end of the bargain. "In any case, I'll make no additional demands upon him. Once Anne is suitably wed and an heir is conceived, then we can go our separate ways. We'll both get what we need and then get back to our own lives." Charlotte shook her head. "I still think this is recklessly ill-advised." Arabella grinned. "Quite possibly, but that doesn't mean it won't work." She looked back out the window. "Assuming I can speak with him without causing another horrendous scandal." Charlotte snorted delicately. "Good luck with that." Before Arabella could say anything else, the door of the townhouse in front of which they waited opened, and she sat up with a gasp, her hand on the carriage door handle. "There he is!" Her heart pounded in her throat. She had to time this perfectly. A light too early, and she might get a tip of the hat, but they could hardly converse in the street. Too late, and she'd miss her chance altogether. No, she had to time this just right. Another few steps would bring the Duke right in front of the carriage. All she needed to do was fake a tumble and fall gracefully at his feet. Shouldn't be too difficult. Arabella closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and threw the carriage door open. Then she lurched forward as her dress caught on her boot heel, sending her careening out onto the street with a squeal of dismay. Silas wasn't quite sure what happened. One moment he'd been turning onto the sidewalk outside his townhouse, and the next his arms were full of a squirming ball of feminine frippery. "Hello there," he said, trying to set her to rights as quickly as possible, while she battered at her skirts like they were attacking her. He set her back on her feet, straightening her hat and handing her the spectacles that had been hanging from one dainty ear. But the moment she put weight on her ankle, her face drained of colour and her mouth opened in a soundless gasp. "Oh, careful," he said, reaching for her again. He knew he was being terribly forward, but he couldn't exactly let her crumple to the street. "Harry!" Another woman with bouncy blonde ringlets stuck her head out from the carriage before quickly alighting. "Are you all right?" "Fine," the woman in his arms said, though her voice was strained. "I believe you might have injured yourself," he said. "I live just here. Perhaps it would be best—" "That would be wonderful," the blonde woman said, answering before the injured woman could say a word. "Lady Waterstack," he said, finally recognizing her. "Your Grace." She gave him a faint smile, though her eyes kept straying to her friend. "This is a dear friend of mine, Miss Arabella Bromley."
"Bromley?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Lord Derborough's daughter?"
"Yes, I am Lord Derborough's daughter," the woman answered before Lady Waterstack could. He gazed down into a pair of warm brown eyes, the gold flecks around the irises highlighted by the gold rims of the spectacles perched on the end of her rather blunt nose. She noticed him looking and quickly took them off, shoving them into the pocket of her skirts. She needn't be self-conscious about them. Far from detracting from her looks, they added an interesting focal point to her face. Under normal circumstances, he'd point that out, but she seemed rattled enough as it was without him drawing attention to something that obviously caused her discomfort, at least at the moment. Even without the spectacles lending some charm to her face, she had rather attractive features, when considered separately. Full pink lips, cheekbones high enough to save her face from roundness, but not so much as to appear sharp. Soft blonde hair that seemed to have a tendency toward waviness, if the tendrils that had escaped from their pins were any indication, and those eyes, those velvety brown eyes that upon closer inspection also held hints of green, and more importantly, shone with intelligence and, at the moment, annoyance. Yes, taken one at a time, they were very pleasing features indeed. Yet, somehow, when observed as a whole, the picture became somewhat muddled, though perhaps that was more due to the red splotches on her otherwise pale face, or the fact that her eyes had narrowed and her lips pinched. Distress did not agree with her. He belatedly realized that the poor woman might be distressed because he still had his arms around her in full view of the entire street and had been scrutinizing her for the last several moments when she was obviously in pain from her injured ankle. He hastily stepped back, allowing Lady Waterstack to take his place. "Please, I insist you come inside and rest your ankle for a moment." "Very well. This is most kind of you, Your Grace." He ushered them inside, his eyebrows rising again at the speed at which the ladies moved. It seemed Miss Bromley's injured ankle might not be as injured as he had thought. Interesting. Once she was settled on the sofa in his drawing-room, with her ankle propped up, Silas sent a servant out for tea. "Oh, look at the lovely plants. I think I'll just—" Lady Waterstack gave her friend a hard look before quickly taking herself to the other end of the room, where she wandered through the open doors and into the conservatory. She glanced back once before busying herself with a book she found on a table beside the door, giving them as much privacy as possible. She was still visible, but decidedly out of earshot, leaving them essentially alone. Intriguing indeed. Silas sat on the chair near Arabella. "Now, Miss Bromley, how may I be of service to you?" She blinked at him, either confused or unsure how to proceed. He leaned forward slightly so he could speak quietly. "Your acting skills require a bit more polish before you can debut them on the London stage, I'm afraid." Her mouth dropped open in shock, and he rubbed a finger across his lips to keep from smiling before continuing. "As it is painfully obvious that you are not in true distress, physically at least, I can only deduce that you needed an audience with me for some reason. So, I ask again, how may I be of service?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and dropped her foot back to the floor, smoothing down her skirts. Then she stood and took a deep breath. "You require an heir." This time he blinked up at her, momentarily flabbergasted. He tilted his head, looking her over. "That is true. Are you offering to bear me one?" Her face flushed scarlet, but her head jerked in a quick nod. He sucked his lips between his teeth and bit down, trying to keep his face neutral. She could not be offering what she seemed to be. But since the cheeky little thing was in his parlour, offering to bear his children, and, he presumed, engaging in the activity that would bring that about, he didn't feel too poorly about playing with her, just a bit. He stood as well, smoothed his vest down, and gave her a small bow. "That is a very kind, and I must admit, intriguing offer, Miss Bromley. However, any child I may have must be legitimate, so I'm afraid I will not be able to accept." Her eyes grew as round as saucers, and her mouth dropped open again, all colour leaching from her face. He allowed her a moment to recover from her shock, though it was physically painful to keep from laughing. No, that's not what I meant at all," she stammered. "Of course you'll require a wife first." She spoke the word as though she was spitting out glass. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering to find me a wife before providing me with an heir?" He tilted his head again, forehead creasing in mock confusion. "Again, kind of you, but I can't imagine any wife being happy about another woman bearing her husband's child." Miss Bromley sputtered, and Silas felt just the slightest bit of guilt at goading her, but by the gods, it was the most entertainment he'd had in a fortnight. "Or," he said, taking pity, "are you proposing marriage yourself, Miss Bromley?" Her face flushed again, then drained of all colour completely, and then turned a strange sort of mottled pink before she dropped to the sofa and put her head in her hands. She moaned, "Oh, I'm making such a mess of this. You must think I am utterly preposterous," she muttered through her hands. He chuckled and sat again, reaching forward to remove her hands from her face. "The thought had crossed my mind, yes. Why don't you start at the beginning, and we'll go from there?" She took a deep breath and blew it out slowly. "Very well. I'm sure you're aware of my family's recent difficulties." He hesitated and then decided to be completely forthright. "If you are referring to the unfortunate situation with your elder sister, then yes, I have heard a bit here and there." More than that, actually, but he didn't wish to distress her with the sordid rumours that were floating about if she were not aware of them, or reminder of them if she were. She nodded sharply. "As you can imagine, this has harmed my family's position irreparably. For myself, I do not care. I am perfectly happy to live an obscure life in the country. But I have a younger sister. She was presented at court last year, but came down with a dreadful illness that kept her from most of the festivities and cut her season short. She hoped to return this year and make a good match, but now, under the circumstances—" Silas nodded. As unfair as it was, their elder sister's decision to run off with the family groom had certainly put her sister's reputation in question. After all, if one sister behaved so injudiciously, the others would be presumed to follow her example. "And you believe I can help with the situation?" he asked. She nodded once, but didn't elaborate. His finger rubbed across his lips, while he regarded her for a moment. "And how does my need of an heir play into all this?" She dragged in another deep breath and closed her eyes, as if not being able to see him would make saying the words easier. "You need an heir. I need a husband for my sister. I thought we could help each other." "So, you wish me to marry your sister?" Her eyes flew open, and he hurried to dissuade her of any other foolish notions in her head. "I'm honoured you deem me worthy of your sister. However, I have no wish for a wife, despite my apparent need of an heir, and—" "Heavens, no! That's not at all what I was proposing. You'd be the last person I'd want for her." He raised both eyebrows at that, and she blushed. "I only meant the thought had crossed my mind, as it would settle your respective issues nicely. However, I do not believe it would be a good match." "You flatter me," he said drolly. "I mean no offence. It is only—" An exasperated breath left her in a rush. "My sister is young, barely more than 18, and she craves excitement and all the advantages a husband could bring her. From what I have observed and know of you, you have even less desire to marry than I. So becoming the husband of a woman who very much wishes to be a wife would be disastrous." Well, he couldn't fault that logic. It was, in fact, the reason he'd avoided matrimony for so long, rather the way a ship would avoid a barnacle if it could. "Agreed," he said. "I would like for my sister to find a husband, but I also want her to be happy, and I do not think she would be so with you," she said slowly, as though she were afraid her words would insult him.
And so they would, if he didn't wholeheartedly concur. Again, I agree. So then, where do you fit into all this?
Unlike my sister, I do not wish to be a wife.
Ah, so you think that makes you the perfect wife for me?
His lips twitched. He was simultaneously amused and horrified, and yet unable to stop the current events from unfolding right before his eyes. He had to see how far she would carry this out. Frankly, he was surprised and a bit dismayed she hadn't already bolted. For all her blushes, the woman had a spine of steel. That much was evident. She covered her face with her hands again. Oh, this is all such a muddle. He chuckled quietly and again reached forward to take her hands, only this time he kept them in his own.
Just say it quickly and get it over with.
Her eyes flashed to him, and then she pulled herself together, firming her shoulders and sitting ramrod straight. If you will marry me, help restore my family's honour and respectability, and find my sister a good match, I will provide you with the legitimate heir you need. After which, I wish nothing more than to quietly retire to your country estate and disappear from your life. You may do as you please. It was much as he'd thought, though hearing it from her lips still made his head spin. And,
my country estate?
She raised an eyebrow. That is your only question? He shrugged and let go of her hands, sitting back in his chair to observe her.
For the moment.
Her cheeks pinkened again. The library at Fall Creek Abbey is famed throughout the country. He couldn't help the grin that broke out.
You wish to marry me for my library?
Her eyes narrowed. No, I require your help with my sister. The library is a perk.
Of course. And in exchange you'll provide me with an heir and let me go on my merry way.
She jerked her head in a quick nod. He sat back, stunned and intrigued and tempted. His eyes unabashedly roamed over her from the top of her prim hat, pinned to her simply coiffed hair, to the tip of her surprisingly large foot that stuck out from beneath her dress. There were certainly far more beautiful women who vied for his hand, but none had ever caught his attention quite so completely. Miss Bromley was a walking contradiction, full of surprises. What other secrets did those golden brown eyes of hers hide? Still, he sighed and shook his head.
It's an intriguing offer, but one I must decline.
He stood and held out a hand to escort her to the door, but she remained seated. Her forehead crinkled. Why? It was his turn to frown.
Why what?
Why are you declining?
She couldn't be serious. Because, aside from this being the most ludicrous scheme I've ever heard, and believe me, that is a compliment, because I could tell you some tales, and despite the apparent advantages of said scheme, I have no wish to force matrimony on a woman who clearly does not want it, especially since I do not want it myself.
She frowned harder. It is not the marriage I object to. It is being a wife that isn't appealing.
Yes, but you can't have one without the other.
But that is exactly what I'm proposing. Think of it as a temporary marriage. He dropped back to his chair and leaned forward, beginning to enjoy their battle.
Yes, but you are failing to acknowledge the fundamental flaw in your plan.
Which is? She asked, her eyes narrowing dangerously.
You say now that you have no wish to be a wife and will neatly disappear once our bargain is concluded, but I have no guarantee that you will remain set in your resolve. Perhaps you'll find you enjoy your new status and will wish to continue to be my very public and present wife, and then I'm stuck with you.
Her eyes flashed. Are you saying you're afraid I'll become so enamoured with you that I will refuse to honour our agreement? He shrugged, pinning her with his most roguish smile.
Stranger things have happened.
She raised a delicate brow. I can assure you no such thing will happen with me.
Oh, I'm rather a catch, and quite charming, so I'm told.
Her lips twitched. "Yes, I'm sure you're told rather a lot of things."
Ha! Saucy little thing. He ignored that. "And should you become so besotted—"
"I won't."
"But you might."
"But I won't."
"But you might."
Miss Bromley bit her lip, though whether it was to keep from laughing or screaming he wasn't sure. "Assuming anyone would wish to be stuck with you is a rather bold assumption, Your Grace." He gave her a lopsided grin. That mousy exterior of hers hid a hint of a lioness, a scrawny, fragile, and probably toothless lioness, undoubtedly, but a feisty one nonetheless.
"A bold assumption, yes," he said, "but my point stands."
Those golden eyes narrowed as they watched him. "Then you wish a guarantee?"
"Yes."
"Then I give you my word," she said with a nod, as if that decided it all.
"Which is trustworthy, I'm sure, but I'm afraid I require a bit more of a guarantee than just your word."
She tensed, her entire body going rigid at the implied insult. If she were a man, he'd expect to be called out after that remark. Judging from her expression, she might just do so anyway. Wouldn't that be entertaining? Instead, she dragged in a deep breath through her nose and briefly closed her eyes before speaking again. "What if I could give you such a guarantee?"
"You can't."
"But if I could?"
"But you can't."
Her eyes narrowed again. "We could add a clause in our marriage contract." He opened his mouth for another argument, but paused.
Go on."
Her eyes sparked, and she leaned slightly forward. "We will put it in writing that I will do my utmost to bear you a male heir, and then will retire to the country."
"That seems—"
"But," she said, holding up a finger, "we also include that you will expend all your influence and resources to restore my family's reputation and make my sister a brilliant match." He tapped his finger against his chin.
"As part of the marriage contract.
She nodded and folded her hands in her lap, waiting for his answer. He sat back and watched her while his mind spun. She was right about one thing. He did need an heir, rather desperately. His grandfather had been harping on him to do his family duty for years now, and the older the man got, the worse the harping grew. And the lady was correct. Silas had no wish for a wife who would want his constant attention. He enjoyed his freedom and the way he lived his life. A wife would be a most unwelcome addition. But a wife who would provide him with the heir he needed, and who was then obliged legally to remove herself. He'd have all the respectability and benefits of a married man without the hassle of actually dealing with a wife. He could trot her out when the occasion demanded it, and not have to deal with a doting spouse begging for his attention when it didn't. As an added bonus, his grandfather would hate that Silas had chosen his own wife. His grandfather didn't trust him to choose his own breakfast, let alone a suitable bride. Marrying a Bromley would give the old man indigestion for a year, though he wouldn't say a word, because at this point Silas was sure he'd accept anyone as long as it got Silas duly wed, and it might be quite nice to have a strong, strapping son to carry on his name, so he'd been told. That bit was unavoidable, no matter his feelings on it. Besides, he'd had more fun in the last half hour than he'd had in quite a long time. Their time together could be rather diverting, for a multitude of reasons. Very well. He sat up and nodded.
I accept.
Chapter 2. Arabella squinted at him, not certain she heard him correctly. You do?
He raised an eyebrow. Did you wish for me to say no?
Her mouth opened and closed for a minute, her mind grasping for an answer. Part of her certainly had wished he'd said no, though she was grateful he hadn't. She sighed. Of course not. However, if I'm honest, I didn't truly expect you to say yes. Now that you have, I confess I'm at a bit of a loss. His lips twitched again, and her eyes narrowed further. She understood how ridiculous this must seem, but he...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?